Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Pro Democracy Pod. We have some great guests lined up, but first off, I just want to give a little disclaimer. I'm very sleep deprived today. My mother-in-law is visiting, so I am going to preemptively disavow anything that comes out of my mouth on today's episode. Moreover, the views expressed on today's episode do not reflect the opinions of Pro Democracy Pod. So just getting that out there. Mila, if you'd like to introduce our guests.
Yeah, so I think this is really funny to me because River's like the center of Twitter controversy all the time. So I've
The disclaimer was
Yes,
for
his
me.
main character moments.
and that's why we love him. And so yeah, so welcome. We have River, Eric, and Fox on. River writes about class politics, and Eric and Fox have their own show on YouTube called The Red Lettuce, where they analyze things from a Marxist and anti-speciesist perspective. So we are going to talk today about how imperialism impacts working families at home, not just people in target countries. And this is like kind of a sensitive topic. A lot of times you hear people kind of trying to argue that imperialism benefits every single American rather than a certain class of Americans. And so I thought it would be really cool to get people who write really great things on US class politics to come on and talk about this stuff. So welcome everybody, and maybe we can go around the table and introduce ourselves. So River, do you want to go?
Icebreaker.
Yeah, I'll go first. My name's River Page. I used to be a contributing editor at Twink Rev Magazine back when that was running. I've also written for Splice Today, and I just started a Substack a newsletter called Chain Smoking to Babylon or Chain Smoking to Bethlehem. Shit, I forgot the name of my own Substack. I just created it last night in like a weird manic episode, but I am going to post something either tomorrow or the next day. So you can check that out. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. The link's right in there. So cool.
Eric?
Well, yes, like Mila said, I'm one of the hosts of the Red Lettuce. So it's a YouTube show. And we just analyze things from a Marxist perspective, and we pretty much advocate for proletarian patriotism and socialism with American characteristics, and we tend just to focus on like what's going on in America and how imperialism impacts American workers, because we often see that being overlooked on like lefty media. So that's what we do, and yeah, you can find our stuff on YouTube, and we're also at you can find us on Twitter at Lettuce Red.
Hello, all you cool cats and kittens. I'm Fox. I'm the other half of the Red Lettuce, and you can find me being hot on Instagram too at Cadno with a K, and I release music sometimes. I am really happy to be here and talk about imperialism and foreign policy, and it's because it's one of the it's some of the politics that have the largest continuum throughout my life, and so I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about it, and I thank you for inviting us on.
You're muted, babe. Oh, babe, I think you're muted.
Mila, you're muted.
We are very happy to have you. Sorry, I can't believe we've been like doing Zoom stuff for like over a year now, and I still mess up with the but yeah, so thank you all for coming on. I think just as a preliminary thing, maybe we could again go around and talk about how exactly, like, what your take is on how U.S. imperialism has impacted its citizens at home, and how maybe different citizens experience American imperialism differently. Because it's clear to me, for instance, that the CEO of Raytheon does not experience imperialism the same way that, like, the average American citizen does. And so what do you guys think of the discourse on this right now? And what is your take on this? Should we go in the same order? I don't know.
Or we can go backwards so that I can have time to gather my thoughts.
Okay, Fox, you're up.
Okay, perfect. So I'm noticing, so in tandem with this conversation about imperialism, and how, like, do Americans benefit from it or not? I definitely don't think like every single American benefits from imperialism, but in tandem with that, I'm seeing a lot of really bad takes about, like, military service people and soldiers, and people really just they do think that people in the military all just, like, shoot people, which is not true. Most soldiers are never deployed. They never see actual war. But I come from a military family. I live I grew up in next to a military base, and most of my family has connections to some branch of the military, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Army. And so a lot of my friends after high school, they saw no future for themselves here in our hometown, and because it's kind of a poorer area in rural Illinois, and so they signed up for the military, and even my uncles, my dad, even their lives never improved after they did their service. They really struggle with making ends meet sometimes, and they talk about how like, the government advertises, oh, there's all these benefits you get from signing up to be in the military, and that turns out to be part of the scam. So the other part of the scam is, we've tricked you, the people of the United States, into thinking that we're doing something good when we're invading countries and stealing the resources. And then when you get home, you've got to fight for your health. A friend of mine had to fight for birth control after she finished being in the Marines. It's really not what you like. There's this mythology about what it means to be a part of the military that the left really needs to reevaluate and analyze, because it's not true. A lot of those things that people have been saying are just not true. Most soldiers don't see warfare, and they don't kill people, and they're also exploited. And when they get home, their lives really don't, when they're in the service, they are guaranteed housing on some level. And then when they get out, it's still, they get a little bit of support, but eventually those things start running out, right? And like Social Security, like that stuff has been defunded and taken away from us. Like millennials and even some of the boomer generation are, we're going to work until we die, right? That's what it sounds like. Sometimes that's what it feels like, and that's not good for our health. That's not good for our culture. So I wish people were, they saw it the way I did, because then we could maybe move forward a little bit on something, and stop having these purity, like, moral expectations of other people before we decide if we're going to work together and move forward.
Yeah, there's like a universalist fuck the troops approach by the left. And look, there's war criminals, sure. Just from my own experience, I've talked to recently about this on Twitter. I have a friend from high school who went to Afghanistan, and I have a couple cousins that went to Iraq, and and I think I mentioned this on a previous episode of our podcast. A lot of the people that do get deployed were told that they would never be deployed. The military recruiters just straight up lie, and not a single one of these were like a rich boy, right? None of them were like, oh yeah, I just want to kill. People saw this as a means of supporting their families. But my friend from high school, he while he was in Afghanistan, he never killed anyone, but he did see a U.S. military tank hit a 4-year-old girl. Her body went flying through the air. And of course he came back with like so many scars. And he became addicted to heroin. When you're used to that constant adrenaline rush of being in the military, of being indoctrinated that there's this constant threat to your life, you come back and it's like you don't even know what living is anymore, so you turn to drugs. And I don't even think it really needs to be said that a large majority of the homeless population is former veterans who have been just like kicked to the curb by their families, by the Department of Veteran Affairs, which is also underfunded. So yeah, I really think that the left is mistaken, and then you have I think about Mike Preisner. He's an activist with PSL and a producer on Abby Martin's Empire Files, and this is he's a great journalist. He does incredible work that exposes the empire and its crimes. And then you have ultras on Twitter that call him a baby killer. It's like I don't think he killed any babies. Look, which is not to say that joining the military is not an immoral thing. I don't know, you guys could feel free to disagree. I do believe that you shouldn't join the military, but that doesn't mean that everybody who did needs to be totally ostracized from society. I totally agree that the left really needs to rethink its approach. And that some of the best allies that we can have in the anti-war movement are veterans,
people with experience. Yeah, exactly. And when we hold this line of every single service member is a disgusting piece of shit, we're taking focus away from the culprit, which is the ruling class, which is the government, which is Raytheon, which are the weapons contractors. Those are the people who are benefiting from war. The oil lobby, like all of those people, they're the war criminals. They're the ones who need to be held responsible, because most people I know, almost every single person I know that has joined the military just wants to better their lives. And when my sister was a Marine, she helped put rapists in jail. Like she did that. She helped charge people with crimes, which is that's a whole nother conversation, like jail and prison abolition, which we don't really have to get into. But if anyone deserves to go to jail, I think it's a fucking rapist. But which
I'm pro putting rapists in jail. Don't worry.
Right.
Yeah,
I have a controversial view that's okay.
Yeah, and it's and so I think that if we keep holding this, I agree with what you were saying. I'm gonna let someone else speak though.
Yeah, I do have to say, when I first got, interested in anti-war politics, I was very young and I didn't have a very good understanding of these things. And, I didn't even know growing up that Americans didn't have universal health care, for instance. I didn't know that in a way, I took, some of the privileges we have here in Canada for granted. And I kind of was one of those people that had a bit of like a bitter sort of outlook on like the US military. Also because I didn't really have an understanding of like the economic forces at play, like the weapons manufacturers. And so it's a very simplistic view where you're like, okay, yeah, like these people, many of whom don't have accesses to the same privileges that I do, who have to pay for their healthcare, for instance, like something as essential as that, might be, enticed into joining the military. And I think what changed things for me is when I was reading a lot more about like organizing and like, movements and stuff like that. And I kind of realized that in order to get stuff done, we need to actually connect our struggles to each other's and, say, okay, like the ruling classes in the Middle East and in the US have more in common than like members and random member of the US military and the weapons manufacturers in the US. And so I do think it is important to have these conversations because it's important to connect those struggles. But anyway, that's my input. Eric, you're up.
Yeah, no, what everything you guys are saying is on point for me. Alex was brought up like all these ultras who have these like really bad takes, on people who are not our enemies, like military people who are in the military are not our enemies. It's the imperialists, and they're there to be, they're just like, shit puppets in the wise words of Jim Leahy from the Trailer Park Boys. These people are imperialist shit puppets. That's what they are. That's who they serve. They serve the imperialist class by distracting everyone from our real enemies who are right here at home in the imperialist empire. I mean, because like these ultra shit puppets, they go around trying to blame like average workers and try to say that, average workers in America benefit from this shit, and they don't. Because we can just look at the situation in Afghanistan, for example. I said this on our last show on our proletarian patriotism stream. Afghanistan is a perfect example how U.S. imperialism doesn't benefit American workers, because our government spent over $2 trillion illegally occupying and bombing the country. Meanwhile, here at home in America, our infrastructure is crumbling. Our police and surveillance state is expanding. Living standards are decreasing. Majority of workers work paycheck to paycheck. Over 10 million kids in America go hungry. There's 60,000 people die from no health care. There's 40% of the homeless population have jobs, and majority of people pay over half of their paycheck just to live in an apartment. And so these are direct results of imperialism and how imperialism is diametrically opposed to workers. But with all these conditions, I think brings about revolutionary potential of the American proletariat. And I think that's something we should really dive into. What can that look like here in America? What do we need to make that happen? Because I think we're in this like pre-awakening, pre-party, pre-organization stage. I'm wondering how we can get out of that to develop an actual socialist movement here in America. But that's what I have to say about that.
No, if you don't mind, before we go to River, I think that's such a great point that you made about the increasing military and police state, surveillance state. And, it's funny that you also brought up movements moments later, because, I got started reporting in 2014, I would go around New York City and film Black Lives Matter protests. And at the time, a major demand it wasn't defund the police, it was demilitarize the police. Mm-hmm. Defund the police wasn't the talking point at that point yet. Mm-hmm. And that opened up a lot of space for conversations about for example, the Pentagon's 1033 program. This is a program of the Pentagon where it takes all the hand-me-downs from Iraq and Afghanistan and sends them to American police departments. And this was like totally out of control. I remember Rand Paul actually gave a great speech in the Senate where he grilled the Obama administration's director of this program about some of its excesses. Like, for example, police departments that are, have bayonets, a police department with one police officer full-time employed with an armored bearcat, that kind of stuff. And, so it's interesting to see how that also could have opened the door to other conversations about imperialism and how the war comes back home. Unfortunately, I think Black Lives Matter kind of took a different direction, and became and stopped focusing on demilitarizing the police. In fact, an end result of it was to give them more surveillance equipment in the form of body cameras. And that was a result of what happened in 2014, not recently. So, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's that's a big part of what the topic is of today's show of imperialism at home, because you have these, it looks like fucking Fallujah and small town Mississippi, it's totally crazy. And then, there's also like the no-knock raids, which have just skyrocketed over the past 20, 30 years, which, look, this is something that affects American workers, especially Black American workers. The militarization of the police and the increased surveillance power. So I'm really happy that you brought that up, Eric. River, if you want to give us your take on this.
Yeah, just playing off what you just said, it's even more direct. I mean, it's like, the empire comes home. It's this like grand theme, but there's actually like even more direct sort of things. Like, one of the biggest like sources of recruiting for police work is ex-military people, and it's usually not people who were like medics or like fix like washing machines or whatever. It's people who have the skills. And so we shouldn't be surprised that they come home and they treat their own countrymen like an insurgency, because that's what they've been trained to do. Some of these guys, since the time they were 18, 19 years old, and so they start to view themselves as a sort of other, which is already a problem with police anyway. But getting back to the idea of like how class interplays with imperialism in the United States, I think a lot of people have this conception of the average military recruit being kind of like the poorest of the poor, just the most exploited person you can imagine. And it's not that like those type of people don't join the military or they aren't targets for recruitment or anything, but at least where I grew up, that really wasn't the case. The people who grew up in the absolute depths of depravity, and trust me, there was plenty of it. I mean, like there's a whole trailer park where I grew up where they don't even have like sewage hooked up, just like the shit just like flows into a creek out the back, just really like rough stuff. And it usually wasn't people who grew up like that who joined the military. It was usually guys who their dad was, maybe used to work at the paper mill or the big like plant where they would make machinery. I don't want to like dox where I grew up in East Texas, or they worked at the sawmill, or they they did something like that. Well, those jobs don't exist anymore, and there's two things that created the sort of like proletarian middle class is sort of this is like Homer Simpson. This is the most quintessentially like American thing. It's a blue collar guy who owns a nice sort of house, and like they struggle, but they have two kids, and you know, the white picket fence and the dog and all of that. And that's just really not it's not an option anymore, because the two things that created it are you know, the military, which all the and all the benefits which have been defunded, and unions. But people still have that mindset of like, you know, if I want to sort of like maintain a level of dignity and maintain, you know, this, you should basically like be a man, because like if you're growing up like in a rural like blue collar environment, like I did, and you're not gay and you don't like move away, there is like this kind of idea. It's like you idolize your dad, you want to be like your dad, and like the way to do that is to make enough money to raise a family, and to do it doing something that feels meaningful, to be like actually productive. These guys, they don't want to fucking work at a Denny's, even if you know, you get your $15 minimum wage or whatever. They don't want to fucking do it. There is, I think, something connected with the idea that you're producing something, or that um, you know, you're making something with your own hands, that like really like satisfies people, even if they kind of hate the job, they hate the monotony of it, they hate whatever. I think it, you know, does something for people that service sector work doesn't do. And so if you don't have that as an option, you're going to look to the military, because the military is this, you know, sort of like means by which you can automatically like gain a sense of meaning and respect, because that's what we've all been taught our whole lives, is that, you know, the military, you know, people are heroes, and um you know, people will pay for your lunch, people, you know, will like, you know, shake your hand. It's a way to be seen. And there is like, you know, of course, the matter of opportunity. That's of course part of it. But another interesting thing is, I think there's the military. We're going to see a step back. We're already kind of seeing it. We're going to see a step back from recruiting the type of guys that I grew up with, or like the poor inner city kids, or whoever it is. You know, the like working class front. They can get to like shoot people on the ground, or fix air conditioners or whatever. What they're going to go for is the educated class, because there's almost like a class system within like the military itself. You have these guys like I grew up with, and then you have the guys who were commissioned, and like they went to college, they were recruited out of college, maybe they were recruited as officers in the reserve, whatever, and those are the guys who, you know, fly the drones and collect all the insidious data, and do all the like kooky like computer shit that the type of guy I grew up around doesn't know how to fucking do and doesn't care about. And those are the type of people that are being recruited, which is why you kind of see a rebrand a little bit. Yeah, I have a lot of right wing fans of my writing, and they were all posting about the military is going woke, because John, who was one of Biden's new top brass, I can't remember his name. He was testifying before Congress, and he was like, I want to learn more about critical race theory. And he's like talking about like Robin DiAngelo and shit. And it's like, that is not for the type of guy I grew up with. That is for, you know, the faceless, like ethnically ambiguous, you know, bisexual woman who is going to Georgetown and couldn't make it as a fucking spook. And so now she's going to join the military, and she's going to sit behind a desk, and she's going to like be like, okay, that's where you drop the bomb. Or she's going to collect intelligence, or she's going to, you know, translate Farsi that she learned on a study abroad trip or something, you know, something like that. That's what they need. the needs of the military are changing because you don't need cannon fodder anymore. What you need are skills, technological skills. And so the institution is going to be even more professionalized. There's going to be even less, opportunities for working class people to get ahead in this way that I think we all agree is not ideal for them or the world. And it'll be another excuse to, just like defund the military, or not defund the military, but defund, the VA and the, grants for college and the grants for like military housing, like after you get off out of the military and stuff, because the people that are joining, once they get out of the military, they don't need that shit anymore. They can go work for Raytheon, they can go work for a private intelligence firm, they can go work for Google. They don't fucking need it. So it'll just be an excuse for more austerity.
Yeah,
that's it.
Great
really
points. Yeah. I mean, I wrote an essay about the Biden administration going woke, and the institutions of imperialism going woke. I talked about the finance institutions, the intelligence, and I talked a little bit about the military. And River, I think you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head here. Not only are they trying to diversify, but they are trying to recruit a higher skilled level of service member. And I think that part of the reason for that is that, like you said, they don't need the cannon fodder anymore. Why not? Because the American public doesn't have the appetite for conventional warfare that it did 20 years ago when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we do it through proxy warfare. Now we do it through, unconventional warfare. And in order for those things to be successful, you need people that, you're right, they sit at the desk and they pick the targets. Of course, they're either not very good at it or very evil, considering how, the United States thought they were bombing ISIS-K and wound up killing like 6 kids just this week. So, maybe they're not all that bright, but, they go to Georgetown. You're right. So good enough. Really quick, I do want to say that we're going to end the Periscope stream, and the rest of the show will be available on Rockfin. It costs about $10 to subscribe, but with a subscription to us, you also get full access to everybody else that's on Rockfin doing, this kind of alternative political content that that's been demonetized and censored by, mainstream social media companies. So I encourage everybody to check us out there. Mila, if you want to take over while I just end this show on Periscope.
Of course. So yeah, these are all really great points. And I think, we all saw that CIA ad or that video of, I forgot that guy's name now, talking about critical race theory. And like, it's honestly absurd, but I think it's part of a long sort of ideological tradition of, using so-called progressive ideals, whatever that may be at the time. At one point, it was Christian Enlightenment, in order to sort of rationalize the war to everybody else. And I think like one other thing that, like one form of warfare, because we're talking about how, war is not conventional anymore. Or it's not like just boots on the ground anymore. I think another sort of form of war that's becoming very predominant is sanctions, and people don't typically think of sanctions as war as well. But what sanctions do is essentially a form of class warfare as well against, the average people of countries that are sanctioned, like Iran, or in Lebanon, so like where I have family, for instance. And what's happening there is that, the average person is struggling to access, basic medicines, or they're waiting 6 hours minimum in line to get gas. And, the people who are impacted, or like the people who are supposed targets of these sanctions, the ruling classes of these countries are not really struggling at all. I'm curious what people's thoughts are on how, U.S. sanctions might impact its people at home, or what your guys' thoughts are on this, because I feel like now the most predominant form, or at least a very predominant form of warfare, has been the use of sanctions.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the oh boy, yeah. So okay, before we move on to that, I do want to add to some of what River was saying. Gay people have been seeing like pink washing for a long time now, and we've been calling it out. And people think we're crazy because Israel, and oh well, they're gay friendly. No, they're fucking not. So
wait, but Gaza doesn't have a pride parade, so they've said apartheid forever.
Fox, you said pink washing, I realize now, but I thought you said Pete washing, as in Pete Buttigieg. and I was like, yeah, we've been saying it forever.
we have ever since that rat faced motherfucker showed up. We've been like, rats are actually kind of gross.
Honestly, thank God for Rockfin's like free speech absolutism, because that might have been a problem.
I love you. I love you. I love you. But I think pink washing definitely goes hand in hand with imperialism. It is imperialism. It's making like oppression politics complicit in imperialist warmongering, and sanctions are a huge part of that as well. I mean, it's no coincidence that the Trump administration would slap a shit ton of sanctions onto China, and then hate crimes on Chinese people in the United States, Asian Americans, or anyone perceived to be Chinese gets hate crimed. Like there's those people live here. They're our people too. They're not some foreign enemy. They're workers trying to make their livelihood, and so that's, I think, the quickest example I can find how to answer your previous question. I think another example also is Cuba. The Cuba lobby in Florida, and maybe River has more information about that. But the Cuba lobby, that's why Florida is such a huge focus during presidential elections, because I don't know if either of you or any of you know who Kim Iverson is, but she has this really great video about the Cuba lobby in Florida, and I highly recommend checking that out. But the sanctions that we slap onto Cuba, the sanctions our government slaps onto Cuba, are totally illegal. The whole world votes against it every single time, and the only other country that always falls in line with the United States is Israel. And so, here we have pink washing Israel, playing to LGBT identity politics, and illegal sanctions on Cuba, which starve and kill people. Same with sanctions on the DPRK. Like that's racism, and that justifies our military presence on South Korea.
And the Cuba shit in Florida, it is intense. Like, you even get it here, and like, I mean, that shit ain't for me, baby. Like, I'm in the Panhandle, we're in Lower Alabama, so it's like there's like 10 Cubans here. Like, nobody, like, so it's not even really for us, but like, you still get the ads, that Biden is, friendly with Castro or like whatever, and it's just, it's really which is like not even true, but like anything. No, like the Florida, in South Florida, I mean, those people are. It's weird in one way. Okay, so I'm gonna go off on like a little tangent here about the Cubans of South Florida.
Do it. River's gonna get canceled.
I like,
no,
on a
I'm
side
saying-
note, I like Rivers' take that Pitbull is CIA, just relatedly, but
Yeah. How does
anyway.
he have that many hits?
Seriously,
Has anybody ever put on a Pitbull
everything is
song
shit.
willingly?
It's so shit. It's just like the worst crap you could ever listen to.
Nobody's ever been like, I'm gonna put. Hey, have you heard the
Yeah,
new Pitbull album? I've never fucking heard that in my
I
life.
never heard that at a party. Yeah, put on some fucking Pitbull.
No, it's
No.
never happened.
Mm-mm.
Spook. That's what he is.
Spook.
But anyway, so no, okay, so this is like a population of people that is right wing, but somehow like aligns themselves with like the Republican Party, but is somehow like the least assimilated immigrant group in American society. Like they literally cannot think about anything to do with like politics without like just without having to do with Cuba. Like it's insane. Like I remember like when those like protests or whatever were happening, the fucking mayor of Miami being like, we need to invade Cuba. Like the Cuban Americans demand it. I'm like, they're like 2% of the population. They can shut the fuck up. Like if you left Cuba, it's not yours anymore. Like, and a lot of these people, like they're like third generation. It's like, you're not going to fucking go back there. You're not going to go back to fucking Cuba.
Mm-mm.
So why do you give a fuck? You know, like, I don't know. It's a weird like thing because I know like lots of people who's like, oh yeah, like, I mean, I like, you know, grew up around like Mexicans and stuff like in Texas. And like, I don't think I ever heard any of them talk about Mexican politics, you know, because it was like they're born in America or like moved there when they were young. Like that's just not something they think about or really care about, you know. It is a weird sort of neuroses, and it's very irritating. But yeah, that's the end of my little like anti-Cuba rant. I'm tired of the madness of this state.
I know.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like hereditary grievances, right? Like
Yeah.
their family had their massive wealth, which was built on the backs of actual slavery, taken from them, and they miss having that status. They see the photos of their grandparents who were way more rich than they were, and they want that back, and so they attack, you know, the Castros. I mean, my great grandmother came from Cuba, and I'm not going to say that my family were good people there. They weren't. So you know, it's really that frustration of the loss of status that they want to get back. I mean, and you see this all the time. Like, I do have to correct you also, River. You said that they are the least assimilated immigrant population. You got to go meet the Hasidics in New York, dude.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm in the South, so like all I know is like Mexicans who buy like an F-150, like after one generation. No, I guess Cajuns are pretty innocent. I mean, I remember like my my dad had a Cajun friend named Possum when I was growing up, and he would just like mumble to himself and like French all the time. You couldn't even understand. Like I assume he was speaking English the other times, but you can't understand him. Those people have been in Louisiana for like 400 years, so maybe maybe they're the ones. Lovely people though, great food.
I once went. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
No, I mean, I have I have some members of my family who are Gusanos, and
Are you both like Cuban Jews? Like, what's going on? It's such a weird
Jubin, like the DHS secretary Alejandro Mayorkas for Jubins. No, the Jewish side is separate from the Cuban side, but
yeah,
I don't know about.
It's through marriage. It's through marriage.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I'm as Jack the Perfume Nationalist calls it, I'm like the Simpsons race, just like the anonymous white America, and his family's been here for like 500 years. You don't even really know what you are. Yeah.
No, I'm just gonna say that they always stay oddly silent when you bring up Batista. Like how let's talk about Batista. Do you think Batista was cool? And they don't say a thing about it. They don't say a fucking syllable. But to get back to what Mila was saying about sanctions, I think, sanctions are definitely warfare. There's class warfare for sure. I think, sanctions exist to curb existing socialist states from reaching their full potential, because if they were, then I think people in America who claim to hate socialism and communism or whatever would see how great and successful these existing socialist states are. I mean, they already are. That despite all the sanctions, they have achieved great things. But in our media, we see like these like food shortages or whatever crumbling, some infrastructure crumbling in certain places, and they blame that on the government when it's really our government, and it's our government, the imperialists, who are imposing that on these people. And I think if that were to go, if they didn't slap sanctions on these socialist states, then the American people who claim or think that they hate socialism or it's evil, it's bad, or whatever, it's against their own interests, would see that the opposite is true, because socialism is the enemy of imperialism. So that's why they do it. This is why we see what we see. So yeah, I think it stops, win-win cooperation, because that benefits the imperialists, because the whole point of imperialism is imposing your markets onto other countries and making them poor and taking all the profits for themselves.
Well, it's interesting because, like, usually sanctions are on socialist countries, but not necessarily. Like Lebanon is an example of like a hyper capitalist country, and it's interesting to me because when a sanctioned socialist country is crumbling or their economy is like not doing great, it's like this is socialism's fault. I've never once heard anyone say, with Lebanon, like, oh yeah, this is capitalism's fault. The sanctions, instead, the issue that the US and Canada have with Lebanon's government is that it's not subservient, at least not all of it, right? A lot of it is, but some of it, like part of it, is not subservient to their interests in the region. So, for instance, they didn't support the dirty war on Syria. They give aid to Palestinians. And so things like that. And I kind of relate to what you guys are saying about, Cuban diaspora, because I do think there's a section of Lebanese diaspora who are a bit similar. Maybe they don't come on as strong and don't have as much influence as the Cuban diaspora in the US, but there are definitely, it's crazy because you have people in the diaspora here who are cheering on the sanctions, and getting mad that, they're importing. Now Iran has given oil to Lebanon to import because there's gas shortage, right? And if you look at polling, people who actually live there, regardless of their religious affiliation, support taking the oil or accepting oil from Iran. And so there's a total disconnect, I think, between what diaspora communities want and what the people at home want as well. And I think, you see this in a lot of different communities. And so the sanctions, again, it's like, I don't know, I think there's something that's like very upsetting about wanting it, like wishing it on your own like country, but at the same time, I don't think these people really have allegiance to their country anyway.
No, they don't. And you're right. And yes, it's not just socialist countries. The U.S. like they slap sanctions on anti-imperialist countries, or any country that stands in the way or tries to break free of U.S. imperialism. They go after for sure. And short story. There's a lot of people like dysphoria people. Like I went on a date recently with a guy from Venezuela, And so this was really interesting. You know, he was obviously a Gusano from Venezuela, and he saw one of my posts about it because I posted something about like how the sanctions. It was something about the sanctions, or it was something about Maduro. I forget what the post was about. Oh no, it was about Castro. Oh no, it was I posted something about Castro for his birthday, and the guy said had some shit to say about it, and he was relating it to Venezuela and why he like lives in America now, and he was just like explaining why it's so horrible there and it's all the government's fault. I'm like, well, do you know how sanctions work? Because everything that you listed is because of U.S. sanctions.
Sounds like a hot date.
It was it was really, really hot. In like the least hottest way possible. So I mean, they're all over the place. These people have no allegiance to their people. They have no idea how sanctions work. They bought into the bourgeois ideology of American exceptionalism and like bourgeois nationalism, and it's really frightening because they assimilate really quick to that.
With Venezuela, I think it's you know, a lot of it's because a lot of the problems which are real. I've been there, are because of sanctions.
Right.
But there's also an under discussed side of that, which kind of fits in with the theme of our episode, which is like the imperialist war on the working class. Because in Venezuela they've had this for a long time now. They have, when workers go on strike, that's a strike. When the business class goes on strike, that's a capital strike. When they start refusing to manufacture certain essential goods, that's called a capital strike, and that's what they've been doing there for a long time. So you do have these very real shortages that aren't entirely because of sanctions. A lot of it is because of sanctions, but there's also that internal class warfare that really creates a lot of problems for average working people. So it's not just the diaspora that's like saying, well, fuck the working class back home. It's the business class in those very same countries.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go ahead.
No, and I also just want to say, he was saying some ridiculous things, and I go, well, I mean, I don't know if you can see this from your Audi, but don't you see homeless people all over Chicago? Don't you see tent cities all over Chicago? Don't you see people starving all over the country? When we, have all this food surplus, but we, our capitalist system destroys it because it might, like the banana might have a bruise on it, or it might look ugly, so they burn it or toss it. Or like these restaurants, if they have like leftover food, instead of like giving it to like people to eat, they put motor oil over it, like, and they lock their dumpsters so they can't get the food because everything's for profit here, and if you're not going to make a buck, then you're not going to sell it, you're not going to give it away, and that's how capitalism works. It's inhumane, and it's just weird to me how they could somehow see issues with their home country, but they don't see any issues here.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, one thing I kind of also notice with this sort of theme that we're talking about is that, when you have people at home who are advocating for imperialist policies, like in the think tanks, and like, the politicians, you kind of also see this sort of dynamic at play because they're talking about human rights in other countries while
Exactly
responding to the human rights issues and the poverty at home. And like I mentioned this before, and I wrote an article on it during the Cuba protests because I saw people protesting downtown here about like saving Cuba when our downtown here has one of the highest rates of drug addiction in North America. Housing here is one of the most expensive in North America, and like it's just kind of, it also seems like, again, they have even though that allegiance is superficial as well, they have more allegiance to people from other countries than to their own people. And it's more troubling when it's politicians. So we have, this new guy running for the Conservative Party of Canada. He's kind of trying to rebrand the Conservatives as like a pro working class party, which is like, in a way kind of good because he's like pulling it away from austerity, right? But the problem is then, you see him make his foreign policy speeches and, gets on his knees and goes like, yes, we're going to do everything that the US wants us to do. We're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, do all these things. And it's like, what does this have to do with the average Canadian's problems? Like, who is this for?
Right.
This is for Canadians. This is for the DC think tanks. This is for Joe Biden. This is for this is for the ruling classes that have nothing to do with the problems that Canadians face. And we're in a housing crisis right now. COVID has destroyed a lot of people's finances. And yet, what's like the focus? The so-called pro, average Joe party is now like making these speeches about what we're supposed to be doing for Israel. And like, I don't want to get canceled or Ilhan Omar'd over this because I'm not saying that like Israel controls our politics in any way, but I am saying that I do think there is, a disregard for the average citizen in favor of allegiance to other interests that have nothing.
Yeah, this is exactly how imperialism, this is the very nature of imperialism, isn't it? Like Libya is a really good example. Okay, they like every citizen of Libya got like a house when they wanted to, when they wanted to start a family. They got a house, they got money, they got payment from the oil sales, they got education, they got a car. Like the Gaddafi's government irrigated the country and brought water to almost the entire populace for the first time ever. And what was the focus of our leaders here in the United States and Canada and the NATO powers in Europe? It was to destroy that. So that is they want to take that away, because how dare you share your own land with your own people? And how dare you not guarantee the rights of private property to the average citizen? What does that even mean? Why? Like they've convinced us, the American psyche, North America, that what's good for us is to destroy these countries, destroy Libya, destroy Cuba, destroy North Korea. There's no homeless people in North Korea. They all have a place to live. I can go anywhere, and find homeless people in this country, coast to coast. It's horrible. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Meanwhile, like you said, there's like no homeless people like in Cuba as well. There's countless examples of social states that we can point to. But here in America, during a pandemic, millions are about to lose their homes. The homeless population is about to get so much bigger. And in Venezuela, they have a housing project that they've been constructing, a modern housing projects all over to house people. Well, how come that's not happening here in America, the richest country in the world? We can end homelessness, $20 billion, end homelessness. There's a reason why we don't do it, because it's class warfare. It's a form of social control.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's also a mental health issue for some people. I mean, there are some people out there, if you gave them a house, they'd be out on the streets in a couple of months because they are like unwell, and I think that's a reality that the left has ignored for a long time because it's uncomfortable, because the institutions that, we used to, and still do to a certain extent, but used to keep people who are like just basically untreatably mentally unwell, were really horrific. And so you had this like weird alliance in like the 70s and 80s between like the right and the left. The right wanted to do austerity. The left was appalled by, rightfully appalled by the conditions in the, state asylums or whatever you want to call them. But the truth is that, some people, are going to have to live in places like that because they cannot live on their own. And like, that's, something we're going to have to deal with. Drugs is another thing we're going to have to deal with. And I know all of these things, well, not all of them, some mental illness is, biological, but a lot of these things have like a material base that, has to be dealt with. But going back to,
sorry, River, I don't mean to cut you off, but that's a great example of imperial, like the opioid crisis. What's the most problematic drug in the United States right now? Isn't it opioids? Like how that ties directly into our foreign policy with Afghanistan and the
also
opium fields
trade
there.
liberalization too, because all the fentanyl's coming from China. So,
Yep.
back to what like Mule was saying. Well, actually, two things. The first is the diaspora communities. Like, this is only going to get worse in the United States, because when I go to South Florida and people think that I'm the Hispanic one, there's a problem. Okay, it's all white people from like Ecuador and Colombia, or not Colombia, but Venezuela, all of these, Argentina, sometimes you even find, it's all of these people who came to the United States claiming they were fleeing socialism after the pink tide. There was actually a woman who was, I think she lost actually, but who was running as a Democrat in South Florida, who her entire thing was like, I fled socialism in Ecuador and a dictatorship in Ecuador. I'm like, there's not a fucking, it's like a liberal democracy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, not even by like lib standards is it a dictatorship. It's like, no, your family was committing tax evasion because of the pink tide. And it's like, and they are a small portion of the population, but they're in like such a critical state for like presidential elections and for the Senate, because it's a swing state, that it does carry a lot of weight. And so people need to watch out for that and know it when you see it. And also, by the way, these are the people who are buying into all the sort of liberal identity politics too. It's like, it's not like the Mexicans I was working with at Red Lobster. Okay. These are like basically just like, spicy whites who are, like, I'm Latino, but they're like lighter skinned than I am. And like their families are fleeing tax evasion. Like, that's who's buying into it by and large, because what like sort of like wokeism is not, it's not even really an ideology. It's the language of a class. It's like the way that the professional class justifies their sort of de facto control over the culture. Because here's the thing, like the bourgeoisie, like the capitalist class, control the economy, but like they don't control the institutions. They might own the institutions, and like sometimes like quite literally, but they're not concerned with the day to day, and they're not concerned with culture either, for the most part.
There's this
all the domain
vlogger,
professional class, and they have to justify their reign because they don't have like the old school, like sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, capitalist entrepreneurial sort of thing. It's all very like divisional, and because most of these people can't actually claim to have like hard Scrabble roots. Like the guy who owns like 5 Buick dealerships or whatever, and was just a good salesman. they have to like invent a sort of oppression that they may or may not have actually faced. Because like the truth is, if you're it doesn't really matter what color you are, what your religion is, what your gender is. Like if you have enough money, like this country is going to be very good to you. And if you don't have any money, it doesn't matter what you look like or what you believe or who you fuck. It's not going to be good to you. But back to like the Israel thing. I mean, I have been seeing this come out in Canadian politics, and it is weird to see this like Americanization of Canadian politics. And I understand like not wanting to be Ilhan Omar. Like I get it. But like I'm sorry, saying that, you know, it's a little weird that like virtually every congressman and senator in the US government has to pledge fealty to a foreign government is somehow problematic or bad, or like an abdication of sovereignty is not anti-Semitic. Like, no, that doesn't mean you're saying Jews control the world. I mean, I grew up in East Texas. We don't have Jews, but like I've met many since I've moved, and you're all fucking podcasters. You're not running the world. I'm sorry. But the Israel lobby and the Israel government is very powerful, and what they're doing is fucking insidious. Like, you know, there shouldn't be websites funded by maybe Israeli intelligence, certainly the Israeli public, that like catalog like the political opinions of like 19-year-old college students at fucking like bumfuck state universities because they because they had like a BDS march or something. I mean, it's insane and Orwellian, and it's being conducted by a foreign power. Like people should be concerned about.
I mean, they were all up in arms about Russia hacking our elections. Like they fell for the scam. You know, they were, you know, it was unpopular to say, yeah, Russia is not a threat to our country, like, or you know, Russia is not the root cause of our problems. They're not controlling our government. Trump is not a Russia puppet. Like it was not like it was unpopular to say those things. I got into a lot of heated arguments about that, and it's so interesting. Like every time you mention Venezuela, I just think of that vlogger on YouTube, Johanna Hausman. Y'all know who that is?
Yeah,
And,
it's funny to see people with like German names from these places.
From Venezuela. Yeah,
I know.
And like
also Jewish. I got in trouble because I was calling her Frau husband, and then people go like, "She's Jewish." And I'm like, "Well, so am I. So fuck off."
Yeah,
but she's the daughter of a guy who was writing for the New York Times and working for the fake administration of Juan Guaido. He was like a finance guy.
He also
He
also wrote, like, her dad wrote all of like the neoliberal policies that triggered the Chavista revolution, and she has like Spanish lesson videos or whatever. She's like a Spanish teacher, she has like these videos about Maduro and how communism is bad, and it reached a lot of people, and the message is anti-communism. Like ultimately, they're trying to convince us how bad sharing with our fellow countrymen is, and that's not what we as communists and socialists believe in. We believe in sharing, and they are really doing everything they can to convince us that that's bad. Any country with like a social sharing system, like universal healthcare, in Canada, they've always got these quips like, oh, a can of Coke is going to be $12 if we have universal healthcare. Like, you're missing the point. We're suffering, and our government is making other people suffer, and then convincing ourselves, like they're gaslighting us. They're telling us that what's good for us is bad. And I forgot how I was going to tie that in. Sorry, maybe somebody else can.
I will say that everything that liberals said about Russians, like if you just imagine, it's what they're accusing you of doing, like when, like you talk about Israel, you know, like I mean, like if you just like replace every time they said something about like being about not even just like Russia as a country, but like Russians, like if you replace that with Jew, like it would be like something from Stormfront. Like it really did like edge into the territory of like ethnic hatred. It was insane. I mean, I remember Keith Olbermann, that insufferable lib from MSNBC, saying that he was like ashamed of his Russian heritage, which he doesn't fucking have any. He's German. But like, I mean, just batshit crazy. And then they just pretended like it. And then after like all the reports came out, and it was like, yeah, that wasn't really a thing. Like they just like acted like it never happened. It was the weirdest, spookiest thing I've ever seen. 2 years of like not even just like trying to build up a Cold War, but like a race war with Slavs.
Yeah.
Literally parroting like Nazis. Literally they're parroting Nazis when they talk of like they espouse the Russophobic nonsense or whatever. And yeah, they really did spend, they're like, oh, Trump is so xenophobic and hateful. And then, you know, on the other hand, they're like, yeah, Russia hacked our elections and they're so bad and Putin's so bad and the Russians, the spooky Russians, like y'all sound like Nazis. You realize that, right? Like you realize this is how fascism is going to come through social democracy. Like,
yeah, and they were like every Russian you talk to is like a part of like the Kremlin. Like it's like that paranoid like conspiracy sort of world. Like they're all like they're all like the lords of like Elder Zion, but they're Russian. Like
yeah,
that's
I was
the vibe.
Go ahead, Eric.
I'm just gonna say I think another problem, a major problem that we have here is like our revolutionary history has been wiped clean from our collective memory. Because in America, we do have a really rich proletarian history. And it's just been replaced with this woke identity fetishism to try to stop any chance of like class solidarity here. And I think that's another big problem that we have, which is why we like have no current revolutionary movement or party here that threatens the imperialist class at home. I think that's really connected. And I think that's why we see this really broad acceptance and talk about, you know, critical race theory and, you know, the Sakai bullshit, and because it's divisive, it works in the favor of the imperialist class. It's good it helps divide workers against workers, and I think that's a major problem here that I see.
Yeah, I mean, we have a movie coming out, or maybe a TV show. I'm not sure which, but you know, it's about the first female Pinkerton. You know, so that it just shows the anti-working class. I mean, these were union busters, basically a private FBI precursor to the FBI. So it's an anti-worker marriage with identity politics. So I mean, it's all right there. If you guys don't mind me touching on a few subjects real quick, I think you know, I was working at RT in Washington D.C. at the time of Russiagate. I used to drink at a bar called Russia House. It was owned by Russians, and I mean, they had bricks thrown through their windows. You know, so and Russians in DC, there were some articles that were interesting in the local papers that interviewed Russians and talked about the suspicion they were greeted with by their landlords, for example, just like at university, in all kinds of ways. But you know, the thing that people have to realize now is that like Russia gets kind of over. And all this same shit, like River was saying about anti-Semitic tropes being used against Russians, that's being done with China. You know, they say that China controls Hollywood. They say that China has undue influence over all of the global institutions, the World Health Organization, the UN. So that's important to keep in mind. On Venezuela, throughout this conversation, I've been reminded of Jorge Ramos. He's a reporter for Univision, probably the CIA's favorite reporter. He went to Venezuela, I think it was 2019, and allegedly he filmed some kids, teenagers, taking food out of a dump truck and eating it. And it's like, okay, great. They tried to use that to manufacture support for, the military coup, the coup by Juan Guaido.
Oh my
But
God.
it's like, Jorge, when was the last time you took a walk 3 blocks from the White House?
Exactly.
It's the same shit. I think, we've been talking a lot about socialism. And I think that's been that's a very effective scare word for the working class in the United States, because it's equated with big government. And when people hear big government or think big government in the United States, all they can think of is a big government that fucks up all the time. Right? We have a government that just spent the past 10 years or so supporting Al Qaeda. Instead of supporting working families in the United States, they've been supporting Al Qaeda, the group which killed 3,000 innocent parents. Not working class parents. They weren't, but they killed they destroyed a lot of families, and we supported them. My article about Afghanistan this week on my Substack, I talk about how it's there's a lot of reasons to think that the United States probably supported ISIS in Afghanistan. The Russians have said it. The Iranians have said it. Hezbollah has said it. A lot of other groups too. Even the former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, has said that that they're a tool of the United States. Instead of supporting working class families, they're supporting ISIS. So when you hear big government, I get it. If you have a government that fucks up all the time, of course you want it as small as possible, or does nasty shit like that. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
Well, no, I mean that's why we have to get to these people and get to them, and explain that we don't control our government. We have no say in our government. Our government's controlled by the capitalist class, by imperialists. This is why we have these results. That's why your life expectancy is declining. This is why you don't have healthcare. This is why you don't have. This is why you're riddled with student debt. This is why your water supply is poisoned. Your food is poisoned. This is why we have a growing drug epidemic. This is why we have an expanding prison population. This is why our homeless population is expanding. This is why you don't have a right to a job or paid maternity leave, or
because we're sending all our money to Al Qaeda.
Exactly. I mean, this is why you don't trust your government, because you don't have a government that fights for working class families. You have a government that works in the interests of a select few, which is the bourgeoisie, the imperialists. And once we have to change the class character of our government.
Right. And to go back to what you were saying, Alex, about when was the last time Jorge Ramos left DC? That is the whole of media, present company excluded, and a few others who are good. But that's all of it. That's all of the people. A thing that I'm working on right now, should be on a couple of days on Substack, is this sort of memoir, which I've never really done before, but I'm playing around with it. But a couple of years ago, when I was 22 and crashing on a friend's couch because I didn't have a place to live, and I was kind of like a scumbag and fucked up. I was on Grindr. I end up talking to this guy who's had been in the military and stuff. Long story short, 30 minutes later, I'm microdosing a date rape drug with a war veteran. Okay. And so we really fucked up, whatever. And then I don't know, I guess I like take his dick out of my mouth and I'm like, tell me about the war. And he's like, yeah. And he goes off and he's like, they don't fucking want us there. These people fucking hate us. They shit in caves. Like, he was like, I don't even fucking vote. And I live in this country. If I was shitting in a cave, I sure as fuck wouldn't give a fuck about voting. He called them sand N words, all of that. But then he was like, no, we should leave. It's not our fucking problem. They don't fucking want us there. They hate us. And I understand why they hate us. We fucking kill their kids. We blow up their fucking like buildings and hospitals and fucking mosques. We need to get the fuck out of there. And now I see all these people in DC, very polite people who would never call Afghans sand N-words, who are actively who are the people, and it's not just the press, it's this whole cohort of people in finance, in the military industrial complex, intelligent, like private intelligence firms, government contractors, all these people from Northern Virginia and New York and places like that who, would be aghast that this guy in a dirty ass extended stay would call Afghans sand N words, but are the ones who started the fucking war, profited from the war, and never want the war to end. And they won't shut up about it. They never want this to end. Okay? And the sort of petty racism of the guy I fucked on drugs is nothing compared to the insidiousness of these fucking liberal creeps. And that's what people have to understand. That is the shallowness of our politics, is that guy is considered the bad guy. And the people saying, no, we should stay in Afghanistan forever. We need to civilize the natives. We need to stay for 100 years until they are ready to let childbearing age women like serve in the infantry or whatever. Like they're those are seen as the good people. And this is like why I always say that wokeism is like a politics of class language. That's all it is. Who do you think really gives a fuck about, who do you think really like hates Afghans? Or not even hates Afghans? Who's really indifferent to the life of Afghans? The guy who called them sand N-words but said that we should get out and we're destroying their lives and they deserve to hate us? Or the people who want to stay there forever and keep bombing hospitals and keep trying to who want to set up a new colony?
Mm-hmm.
You raise a really good point, and that's I tried having similar conversations about that, like when Tulsi Gabbard was like leaving Afghanistan during the presidential election was a topic. It came up a couple of times, and when Tulsi Gabbard was like, yeah, well, we've got to go, it's not going to be pretty, but we have to get out of there, people were like, oh, she's a dirty, she's horrible, she's a terrible person, because people really do think that we're doing good things over there, and that's a problem. It's a problem that like Democrats and liberals make anti-war sentiment look to be like fringe ideology, and then they refuse to, they're like, oh, well, I'm not racist, and they won't talk to these people who might say some really like offensive or backwards things. And it's really unfortunate that's like our biggest, I think one of the biggest things that's holding us back is that people just really, really hold on to this like American exceptionalist ideology. They really, it's really sad. It's really, really horrifying.
Well, I I really like I don't know if this is like a bold claim or a cold take at this point, but like to River's point, I really think that, you know, what causes even like the cause of petty racism against targets of imperialism is caused by the imperial policy itself. And so like
Yes.
and this is very like historical in a sense, because you know if you look at the history of imperialism, you have to justify imperialism to people. If the population sees them as like just the same as them, then it's going to be harder to justify it. So it's very like even the conception of say an Afghan as someone like as a cave person or whatever comes from pro-war propaganda. And then those same people who control the propaganda, like the New York Times or, you know, the CIA or like all of these major liberal institutions will then turn around and say, how dare you conceive of these people as backwards like 20 years later after they sold the war to everybody. And so I think it's more than just, you know, it's not just that like the petty racism is less concerning. It's that I think it's even, you know, a product in the same way that like this Russophobia is a product of you know, the US feeling antagonistic towards Russia and on in a geopolitical sense. And so, you know, it's funny too, because if you go like I've been to the Middle East, and it's like if you go around and you ask people like, would you rather someone insult you or like occupy your country for 20 years, or like bomb your country? Like these people are self-interested just as anyone else in the world is too. Like they're normal people, and obviously they're not going to want to be bombed. And they'll view those people as their enemies. And it's funny because when Trump was elected, you know, Hassan Nasrallah gave a speech being like, this is actually like something to celebrate because unlike Obama, he's not like congratulating us on Eid and then drone striking us, you know, like
So
he's
that's
not.
the red brown. That's the red brown Nasrallah and Trump. I'm sorry.
I mean,
You
he
fucking
still said,
Nazball, Mila.
to be fair, he still also said that Trump losing was like divine punishment for killing Soleimani. So
Yeah.
I think he was more interested. Like I think he was more happy about Trump at the beginning of Trump's career. I think after the Soleimani thing, he became less
Yeah.
valued.
I mean,
It's
like
totally
what you're
insane.
saying is like exactly what our imperialist media is also, our bourgeois media is designed to make us think that our enemies are over here across the globe, when they're not. They're right here in America. They're the ones who own pretty much like these companies that own the media. They own our two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Those are the people who our enemies are. They're, you know, the weapon manufacturers, the oil companies, the banks. Those are the people who, that's the class of people who are making life miserable, not just overseas for other people, but here at home. And that's what we really have to make people see. We don't have our enemies not Russia or China or in Iran or in Afghanistan, the Taliban or ISIS, which the U.S. has created. Okay, it's people. It's the people here in America who own these corporations and the banks, and you know they're the ones who control our government. They control those two parties. And that's who our enemies are. And I think that's why we need to get to people and explain that. And I think it'd be really clear because I think people are becoming more aware of that here in America.
Even the gay bank, the new gay bank.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
I keep seeing
You guys see
people
that?
like. I don't mean to be the first person to post about it on Twitter, but I laugh, and I keep seeing it now, and I've seen some really good takes about it. Like, thank goodness, like we don't need a queer bank. Like, We don't need to queer the IMF either. Like
we're doing that. We're doing that.
We're doing it. We're in.
We're full speed ahead.
Yeah, we need.
Well, it's not even a gay bank; it's a queer bank. Like they're gonna put your entire 401k in like pop Funkos. Like you shouldn't trust these people with your fucking money. Where's the gay guys? I know I want like there has to be like an LGBT person managing my money. I want it to be like a stoic like 55-year-old butch lesbian who like lives off the grid and like keeps her money in gold or something and like listens to Alex Jones. That's what I want. The type of lesbian you can still find in the South. They're lovely. But no, like I mean, Mila, when you were saying like is a a byproduct, the sort of petty racism is a byproduct of propaganda. I think that's true for like the broader population. But for like, people who have actually been there, like this guy, I mean, like, yeah, it's like, I don't really, if you, despite the fact that we shouldn't have been there, which he said we shouldn't have fucking been there, and it wasn't his choice to go there, the fact is, if there's a group of people are fucking shooting at you and killing your friends, like you probably aren't gonna fucking like those people, and you probably are gonna like go to your most like base sort of like instincts. I mean, that's like what happens when your life is literally under threat. Like I don't even hold that against people, even though like I would never like hold those users say like those things. But honestly, like who is like more insidious though? Like a guy saying like about Afghans, like they're shitting in caves, they don't want us there, and these people just want to like take care of their fucking sheep. They don't want democracy, they don't want rights for women, like the women don't even fucking want to vote, like whatever. Like what's more harmful, saying that or saying pretending that we can turn Kabul into fucking Times Square,
Well,
or that like in every like Pashtun village it's just like it's gonna be like an NYU quad, if we were going to be talking about fucking gender or whatever. I mean, these people have lost their fucking mind. They haven't lost their minds. They're fucking cynical, like we have to respect, to a certain extent, you have to kind of like respect people's cultures if you are like, in a in the empire, if you're, somebody on the left, because that is actually the left position, is to just be like, yeah, they shouldn't like dress women like beekeepers and whip them in the streets, but I'm also not gonna fucking bomb a hospital because they do.
Yeah.
I mean, and what would that help anyway? It doesn't, like, there's a sort of myth that like we can
bomb them to peace. That's what you do. You bomb them with like proper gender pronouns. That's what you do.
Well, it's funny because I did research on like I did research on the Arab Spring and like the protests and the sort of rise in popularity of Islamist movements. And it's really fascinating to see because the support for Islamist movements kind of increased or remained higher while religiosity declined. So it wasn't even that like religiosity was fueling support for like these conservative Islamist movements. It's just that these movements were able to sort of explain imperialism and domination to the people, and people would identify more with these like more conservative ideologies in the face of increased instability and the imperial antagonism of Islamism to begin with. And so again, it's just throwing more fuel into the fire. It's not like, and especially this whole like psyop of like liberating the Afghan women is just that just becomes a concern like as soon as the pullout happens, and it's just kind of like war. Like this has also just been established through a ton of research that like war is something that disproportionately harms women as well. And so it's like, I don't know. I think I used to kind of like even want to engage with these people and be like, okay, yeah, but like, is this in women's interest? But I don't even think they believe it either. I don't think they actually believe, because, or they're living under a rock, because like most of the research has shown that these wars have done nothing for women.
Well, no, it has done nothing for anyone, especially here at home, because like war is a racket. Like if people understand that like your tax dollars funds this shit, like your tax dollars funds these bombs that are made to go kill innocent people. What does that do for you when you can't pay your bills? What does that do for you when you can't go see a fucking doctor? What does that do for you when you can't buy groceries? What does that do for you when you have to choose between paying an electric bill or getting your diabetes medicine? You know what I mean? It's just like these are the connections that we have to make. Mm-hmm. And I think the people, the working class in America, they're waking up to that. I think they're seeing through this, because I mean it's so blatantly obvious right now, because there's really no leg to stand on anymore. I think for U.S. imperialism, they're running out of like how many I mean, you can only invent so many terrorists, and like it's just like terror organizations, and like try to like vilify and try to say, oh, we got to go get these guys now. There's a new group just popped up out of nowhere. Don't mind us, we just funded them probably, but let's not pay attention to that. It's just crazy.
In most of like the women's liberation stuff, like there was some things that were happening, but it was all in Kabul. It was like, yeah, if you're like an affluent woman from Kabul, like, you can like join up with an NGO that'll like, have you read Betty Friedan, and then you can go to Kabul University or whatever and like become like a professor. It's like, yeah, sure, like that was happening. But you know what else was happening? The only female warlord in Afghanistan formed an alliance with the Taliban. Okay, this is like a woman who is like 70 years old and commands like basically a militia, and the Taliban welcomed her because like they are invested in like real politic, unlike these like NGO people in Kabul who are invested in like I said earlier, like trying to turn the country into an NYU quad, and it's not going to happen. Like if you want, I mean, honestly, I respect the female warlord a little bit more. It's kind of cool. It's a lot colder than getting like a PhD in gender studies.
The whole discussion of women's liberation is so hypocritical, because look at what we do to women here in America. Look what happened in Texas. Now they upheld the ban on abortion. They have like bounty hunters now after people. They can do that apparently. We have the most women locked up in the world. Women have no guaranteed access to health care.
No maternity leave.
No maternity leave. I mean, this is the biggest bullshit I've ever heard in my life. So again, it's all distraction, because women in America there are no like human rights. If we don't have basic human rights, like right to healthcare, right to housing, right to education, or right to all these basic things, then how can we even, if we don't have those things, how can we even talk about human rights?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that like River mentioned NGOs, right? And they're like, that goes with our sanctions too. Like with one fist, the United States will slap on sanctions, and then on the other open hand, they'll be like, oh, here's our fancy NGOs. And then they'll have like Santa at the dollar store ringing a bell, like, give me your money. And so they already get a lot of money from us. Like they're literally stealing money from us, and they're not doing anything with it. Like Haiti is a good example of that. They got billions of dollars and they built 3 houses. Like this is the nonprofit industrial complex at play. like, oh, we've got to build homes for those people abroad, but here we have, like four houses per homeless person in this country.
Homeless
Mothers.
No, I'm on the record as saying that like corporations are better than NGOs because at least they actually get something done. Like at least like I can go to Walmart and like get like a cheap frozen pizza. Like every NGO that I've ever come across, besides like a mom and pop like animal shelter where you get like a cat with one eye or whatever, some shit like that. Like every like NGO I've run across, it's like the DMV meets Saw. I mean, just like the most boring shit ever. And then 45 minutes later, after some digging, you find out that they like covered up the like murder of an entire village. I mean, like these people are sickos.
Yeah.
Never trust anybody who tells you that they're working at an NGO, especially abroad. If you hear like, oh yeah, I work at an NGO in Afghanistan or in Haiti or whatever, like that should be like, you should just assume that person is in the CIA.
The biggest red flag is human rights.
You're in danger.
That's the biggest red flag.
Governance, any of those.
Yeah, anti-corruption. That's another one.
Yeah.
Where were the anti-corruption folk during like the past 20 years in Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know either.
They'll
River,
never go against like Saudi or like,
of course.
You know what I mean? Like there's always like, that's where it really falls through. Cause like you people like Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau will talk everyone's ears off about human rights in the Middle East. And then when you ask them about Saudi Arabia, it's like, oh, we still want to maintain like a good relationship.
Did you hear they let women drive?
Yeah. Oh my God. Like,
and I can't believe they with this women's rights thing in Afghanistan, people like aren't seeing the bullshit. They're not seeing the forest for the trees of Saudi Arabia. They're not seeing the forest for the trees with Israel too. I mean, when Israel kills a bunch of men, I mean, that's someone's baby. I mean, they literally killed babies. A mother, women's rights should be to be able to raise their children without them getting killed. Okay.
Yeah, and that goes for mothers in our country too, and in Canada,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
River kept hitting this point that I really thought is a good point to make, and it needs to go viral. Frankly, viewers do that, but he kept saying, what's worse, the person who's saying racist things about Afghans and fought in the war, or the person who created the war and is trying to reshape Afghanistan in the image of the United States. But on the left, we're told that the person who's worse is the racist, or the guy who's using racist language, right? Unsurprisingly, or not, that's the same line as the Democratic Party. Half the country is a basket of deplorables. Mm-hmm. So this hostility towards anyone who wasn't ever in the military, working class or top brass, it's a Democratic Party line which has infected the left. So I think that really should be pointed out, is that merger of the left with the Democratic Party on this issue, and of course many others.
Well, it's also no surprise that it's like something that you can't eradicate, right? Like you can't like go around eradicating these like petty attitudes that people have towards people that are different than them. And this is not just something like exclusive to the US. Like I said, like, in the Middle East, people do this all the time with people's religions, and like there's like off-color jokes about different religions, and like, sometimes it's bad and like I wouldn't endorse it, and sometimes it's like just banter, but like I think there's this like the Democrats in the US, they're like I think it's not an accident that they're fixating on something that you can't control. Like you cannot go and control people's attitudes, but you can, like, you know, challenge the military industrial complex. Like you can deal with concrete institutions that actually go and bomb these countries. So it's like, you know, instead we're going to focus on these petty attitudes of people that have no power, because like nothing can be done about that anyway. And like it's never enough with these kinds of politics, right? So even like, let's say you say something racist and then you walk it back and say like, oh, I'm sorry, I've learned better, people will still say like, you know, screw you, like you're evil forever. So it's just like this self-perpetuating thing that's an alternative to actually tackling the concrete sources of racialized people's you know, oppression or whatever you want to call it. It's just so much easier to like go after people's attitudes. And I really think that the Democratic Party, and in Canada, our Liberal Party and our Conservative Party and our Social Democrat Party, they're all fixated on this, right? Like they're all fixated on, you know, how the average citizen think and how can I scold them.
They're focused on the individual, and that's part of the problem. The focus is not on the system. For how many years have we been hearing like cliches like, this is a systemic problem, racism is systemic, this is a systemic thing. And then, well, we as socialists say, let's change the system to a system where we're sharing with everybody. That makes sense, right? That seems like it's going to put everyone on equal footing, but that's still not, for some reason, that's still not enough. And so then the focus becomes this rad lib kind of like, you're the problem, actually. We can't get anywhere because you're white. And like they've got this mindset that that the problem is not the institution of our, it's not our government. It's not the ideology of liberalism. And they put all their focus on an individual who made like a weird tweet in 2012, and then they like harass and spam, and like they never let it go. They never let it go, and then they reject you for the rest of forever. They don't want to, you know, talk to you or organize with you. They ice you out. I think that's really manipulative. I think that's really, really problematic. And then they'll blame you, the individual, for a systemic problem they're contributing to, which is they aren't working with everyone, no matter what they believe. Like we've got to work together, because we aren't going to be able to address all of these systemic racist things unless we're all on the same page. And I think the working class is on you know, for the most part, it is on the same page. If you know, people showed up to all kinds of protests last year. We all understand that there's a fundamental problem with what's, you know, with our governing systems in Canada and in the United States. And I think that the people are ready for change, and people still think that we're not. And those people never leave their house. Like they're just always on Twitter. And honestly, if you're watching this, please get off the internet later. Go outside, touch grass
before it's made illegal.
Come work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you're not in Australia.
And right. Oh my God, those people. That's one thing. So that's one thing I do like about America. Like we would not put up with that shit. I mean, we could have put up with that shit. We had like a mini version of that for 2 months, and people tried to start a race war just to get out of the house. Like they didn't. Like, there's no fucking way.
Yeah,
we'd never do that. But no. Here's the thing that, because I mean, I grew up in the South, town of like 2,000 people. Like I've actually seen like real racism, not like this like fake bullshit kind where I don't know,
microaggressions.
Right.
Yeah. Like where you tell a black girl you like her hair and then like she gets you fired from your job or whatever. Like, I mean, it's like, you know, the stupid shit like that. But like actual like real like I grew up with people in my family who not only like were like didn't like black people. Well, here's the thing, it's complex, is it's like they'd be like, I don't like black. They would basically say they didn't like black people. They would use like the N-word into like casual conversation, play into all the stereotypes. There were even members of my family who thought that like interracial marriage was not only like not something they were into, but like a literal sin. Okay, but it was always like, it'd be like, oh yeah, well, like I like this black guy. They would have like a really good friend who was like a black guy, and they're just like, yeah, like we get along, because it's a town of 2,000 people. You get along with fucking everybody. The black people that they're talking about are not black people they actually know, for the most part. But all that shit like changes. People change with and the like real anti-racism, if you want to call it that, happens on like a very personal sort of level. I mean, half of like the people in my generation and my family, which is like very big, and like very close knit. I mean, I grew up on the road I grew up on. Literally every single person on the road is related to us. You know, I grew up with like my cousins were like basically brothers and sisters. We all stayed at my grandma's house after school or like during the summers. Like it's like a very clannish sort of environment. People literally don't do anything without talking about grandpa first. Like the nuclear family just like did not fucking happen here. And like nearly every person in my generation who's an adult is or I wouldn't say nearly every, about half are either married to like a black person or a Mexican. Partially because damn near every white person in town is like also related to it. But that shit changes real quick when you have somebody in your house all the time that your kid loves. And it really fucking changes when you have grandchildren. I grew up, listening to certain relatives, I'm not going to be too specific, but certain relatives of mine, like using the N-word very frivolously. Now they have a mixed race grandchild, and if somebody ever called her that name, like they wouldn't find the body. Like that's what I'm telling you. You know, because they have a sense of loyalty to family, and people change. People experience these things on a very personal level. All of this, like, talk about systemic sort of bullshit. I understand it because I'm a nerd and I like look into this type of shit, and I'm talking to you kind of people. But like the people I grew up with, like they don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Racist means either you fucking hate black people or you don't, or you hate Mexicans or you don't, or you hate the Filipino guy who owns a fucking donut store or you don't. And that's how they experience it. And so when you start talking about this other bullshit and start saying like, oh, you're bad because you're white, or you're inherently racist because you're white, and they're like, no, like I have like my granddaughter's half black, and I would kill anyone who laid a hand on her. I'm not fucking racist. And they're not.
Yeah,
like regardless of anything, like whatever if they like roll their eyes when they hear like southern like rap or like something, you know what I mean? Like, and they're like, or they're like annoyed by fucking Lil Wayne or whatever. Like, who gives a shit? They actually care about the people who are around them. That's more important than like any of this exterior sort of like broad bullshit that you have no control over anyway.
Yeah, I saw that a lot with like LGBT issues. Like, I mean, I have like a similar sort of story as you, River, but instead of with like racism, it was with like homophobia, And like when I was growing up, like it's like definitely like it was less of a socially acceptable thing for sure. Like it wasn't like how it is now. But like we started to like have family friends come out or like know people who came out, and like that's how, you know, people I know became less homophobic. It wasn't, you know, from like TV commercials saying like no, like fuck hate or whatever those, you know, with the, like those little kids and whatever. And so I do think that is like definitely true. And I also, you know, it's funny because a lot of this so-called systemic analysis is always like saying talk to your relatives, and like when Thanksgiving comes around it's like here's how to talk to your racist relative at the dinner table, or here's how to talk to your homophobic relative at the dinner table, as though like scolding them over like a family gathering is going to make them change their mind rather than just like having that personal connection.
I have a cousin actually, because of, like we said about the gay thing. I have a cousin who, if you actually I think I have asked him, you know, because the whole family they're very strict Baptists, and you know, like I'm really not even like my parents like don't want me to bring my fiance around. Like it is still like an issue. I talk to my mom every week. It's a very complicated, deeply personal thing that's like kind of different than like the race thing. It's like never going to quite be whole, because there's like never there's nothing in the Bible that talks about like, you know, you
Right.
shouldn't marry a black person or whatever. But you know, I have a cousin who it's like, yeah, if you asked him, he'd probably be like, yeah, I think being gay is like sin, and I don't think you should do it, and I think like if you're doing it, you're probably going to go to hell. But my brother told me that they were at a party one time, and this was like after I moved away, and I was kind of like already out a little bit, like in high school, but it was like kind of not, and I don't know. I guess everybody was finding out at this time, and somebody was talking about me and called me a faggot, and my cousin beat the shit out of him, like busted the guy's nose, made him fucking leave. And it's like, who would you, you know, rather have on your side? Like a guy who thinks that you're going to hell because you're gay, but he'll beat the fuck out of somebody to defend you if they call you a faggot, or you know, somebody who castigates you online but believes that, you know, um, heterosexism is like a prevalent malady in our society, you know.
River was, you know, you were saying about these overly intellectual or academic conceptions of racism and how that doesn't really compute to people. Eric was talking earlier about Jay Sakai. This is the guy who wrote Settlers, who, you know, people, the Radlibs who read this book have this idea that there's no such thing as the white working class. You know, they say it doesn't exist. And they use this overly intellectual argument that like isn't going to make sense to like somebody who like a white coal miner or something. Eric, you're obviously like you live in Chicago, which is like a very multiracial city. So I just like what do you think about all that? Like, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I think it's just absolute like bullshit. Like it's totally. I mean, to say like a whole group of people isn't a part of the proletariat when, you know, they make up like the majority of the population is just really wild. and to say that oh, they're inherently, because they're white, so they automatically we are like inherently bourgeois, when you see other people in like from like who are not white acting like are you know, betray their own like class of people or race of people too by, you know, siding with the bourgeoisie. It's just like it's just really weird. It doesn't make any sense. I I think like Jay Sakai. First of all, people don't even know who this guy is. No one knows what he looks like. There's no picture of this person. It's all all serves to keep us divided along like identity. It just all boils down to race, and when that's not the primary contradiction is class, the class struggle. The last thing they want us to do is to unite together. And Jay Sakai is like one of those people who these like rad libs and ultra shit puppets love to parrot as like, oh well, there's no revolutionary potential here because white people are inherently bourgeois and they
all benefit from imperialism.
They all benefit from imperialism somehow. When there's more white people on fucking food stamps, so please tell me how are white people benefiting from imperialism here? There's look at the prison population, look at the opioid epidemic that we were pointing out. Like, I don't know who they're talking about because it's not real. It's not. That's not real.
Yeah, like, Paul Wolfowitz. Like, okay, there's like, there's like, it's the higher classes of
right
that are benefiting.
Right,
it's not,
and it's just really wild to me that people like eat this shit up when they don't look at what's really happening. Like read a fucking statistic. Like,
yeah.
And this is also a very like I hate to use terms like the ists and the ands terms, but is the whole idea of like the white supremacy as like a force that induces black poverty, and like the fact that like the idea that the white working class doesn't exist because of I don't know, the union aristocracy or whatever.
White people we don't benefit from racism. We don't benefit from this white supremacy because if we did, then there'd be no white people in prison. There'd be no white people on food stamps. There'd be no poor white people anywhere. So this is all made up to keep us divided from each other.
Well, and I think also what people miss because liberals really do have no sense. They always talk about history, the 1619 project, trying to trace, but say that the entire country is nothing but racism because in 1619 people who weren't slaves, by the way, black people landed on our shores as indentured servants who worked alongside white indentured servants.
Exactly.
That's what happened in 1619. It's a completely ahistorical project. But
right.
In any case, like I said, growing up in the South, the closest thing America has to an old country, all of its pathologies, all of its sins are sort of laid on the South. And I'm sorry to tell people, but if you think that like there wasn't bigotry against like white people and there wasn't like classism, pervasive classism, you're a fucking idiot.
And how did
you don't know what you're talking about?
Mine benefit from slavery. How did they? Were they all plantation owners, or was that just a select few?
Exactly. And by the way, the descendants of those people are all libs now. And you can tell by the religion, the Episcopalian church, which gay people get married in, it was a church of the planter class.
Oh.
The conservative reactionary Baptists, that was the white trash church. But anyway,
come on, River.
My grandma grew up her brother died because of classism, quite literally. His appendix was bursting. The hospital was 45 minutes away by car. My great grandpa went to the one guy in town that he knew that had a car that he thought might let him borrow it. And the guy said, "I don't want you white trash driving my car. You'll bring it back dinged up. He probably has a stomach ache." And so they went back home. They tried to hitch up, their mule to a wagon to take him back in.
Well,
the
he's
hospital,
benefiting
but it
from
was too late.
right
He was
there.
vomiting up green bile. And so my grandma said that they just laid down with him on the bed and like held him while he died. Because the guy didn't want white trash driving his car. And the only way my grandma was able to get out of this is because she was very pretty. And she married a guy who's like whose parents owned like a little convenience store. That is like the level of like systemic poverty that like you were dealing with in the South until the 70s. My grandma's family did not have electricity until the 70s or running water. It was a third world country full of white people. I remember when I was like sort of like just first sort of learning about this idea of like systemic like white supremacy or whatever. I was on the phone and I was talking to my mom about it, and I was like trying to like kind of explain it to her and like what the sort of theory was, because if you look at the statistics, like it is kind of, you know, it is true, like black people have lower rates of wealth, home ownership, blah 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 blah. And she was like, "What are you talking about? Your daddy works for a black man. A black man owns like the one mechanic shop in town to fix your car." Because there's like 10 black people in my hometown. They've done pretty well for themselves. Some of them are poor, some of them are rich. But when it did bring me back, because when I was growing up, when I thought of poor people, I didn't think of black people. I thought of, I mean, you hate to say it, but like white kids with dirty faces, with moms on meth living in fucking trailer parks, because that's what poverty looked like where I grew up. It wasn't a fucking housing project filled with black people. It was a trailer park filled with, you know, white people who had never and probably would never be able to get a job that pays more than minimum wage. And they have kids, and, you know, life is, you know, just devoid of prospects. And so they do meth and they do heroin and they do whatever it is that gets them through the day.
Right. That's what happens. Those are effects of imperialism. And I don't know how anyone could hear this story that you just said and be like, "Yep, white people benefit from the system inherently. White people don't have any problems. Like they benefit from the system," when there are literally millions of people that go through that same experience or worse, who are also white. It's just this is like it's just crazy that people can't understand that. So it's just
that's what bothers me about like the labor aristocracy like discourse, and you know, white people, you know, you can't organize with white people and stuff. It's really frustrating, because in a way, like they've kind of adopted the racism of, you know, that we normally assign to conservatives, and no, it's just so backwards. It's God, I forgot what I was gonna say. It slipped my mind. Cut you off, and I'm sorry.
Well,
It just slipped my mind.
that's okay. I think we're gonna end it here because we're at over 2 hours now. So first, I just want to say, everyone, go join Black Hammer. And pay your reparations.
Oh my god, it's literally the worst. The worst.
But
Not all gay people like theater, Alex.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. River just launched a Substack yesterday. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him on with Twinkrev. You can find Eric and Fox with Red Lettuce. All these guys are doing really great work. So we hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next week.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank y'all for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Bye, Z.